Ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Nancy Amert, and I'm the director of the Trade Innovation Lab at CGI. CGI, for those who may not be aware, it stands for Consultants to Government and Industry. We are sort of the best kept secret. We actually have almost 80,000 employees, which we actually call members. And we have over 400 offices around the world located in most metro centers. We actually are regarded as one of the top IT service providers in the world. We have annual revenues over 11 billion. Our headquarters is in Montreal, Canada. And I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina, USA. And Charlotte is regarded as one of the major banking hubs here in the United States. And just a little bit about me, my background is largely a mix of IT and banking, and my specialty is in an area of finance known as trade finance. And in particular, this type of niche area of finance, you could think of as the back office part of banking. It includes the financing products such as letters of credit, bank guarantees or bank-to-bank guarantees. It can also include cash and collateral management, along with one of my specialties, which is supply chain financing. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But I'd like to begin by sharing that it gives me just great pleasure, and I'm honored and grateful to attend the Economic Times India 8th Annual Supply Chain and Logistics Summit for 2021, and to meet all of you in this cloud meeting. I really wish I could be there in person with all of you. And thank you to the Economic Times organizers for inviting me to be part of this prestigious conference. So I'd also like to begin by extending on behalf of my company, CGI, and its members, and also in my own name, a very warm welcome to all the guests participating, who, whether you be in person or online. And I do wish you those cordial greetings and best wishes to all friends new and old. This conference actually has an overview and a theme, which is actually surviving uncertainty, which I think is most opportune and relevant given the current circumstances. It's basically been an unusual past year to almost 18 months, and the year 2020 will be regarded literally by history as a wake-up call. So how are we going to thrive in the next coming decade? What will it take? And what areas of the supply chain are really of keen interest. So I'm going to be sharing with you some strategies for overcoming challenges and identifying opportunities to support a new future for trade. And I'd like to start by actually sharing this information from the World Economic Forum. And this was actually from 2019, but it still holds very much true. That a lack of access to trade finance is one of the top 3 export obstacles for half of the world's countries. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are in a lot of countries that just simply they don't have access to the type of financing that you might think of where you're in a more industrialized setting. And this is a key area of interest and a key area of concern. It also potentially is a key area for opportunities. So I'd also like to share a little bit about the work that I'm doing in our Trade Innovation Lab and one of the actual software as a service platforms that we're leveraging to help realize and improve the trade finance processing and also improve the overall supply chain. So just as for starters, again, working to future-proof one of CGI's top IPs known as Trade 360. What is Trade 360? Trade 360 is a software as a service solution that actually is leveraged and used by about 21 mostly large and some global banks from around the world. It's one of the most comprehensive trade finance solutions in the marketplace. It includes 2 of the largest trade banks in the world. It's one of the first software as a service solutions that's been in business for over 19 years. And as you can see along the bottom, we're in over 100 countries. We have about 58,000 corporates that are using the solution on a daily basis, and we're processing over 2.4 million transactions. And we're growing. And one of the things that is offered on the Trade 360 platform is supply chain financing. And supply chain financing actually is probably best understood for how an interaction along the supply chain is modeled here and some of the problems that can arise when you're actually looking at when financing is, if you will, interjected into this chain processing. So let's just start with a buyer that wants to buy computers, and they contact a computer seller. Then the buyer wants to go ahead and get the financing assistance from the bank. And as you know, a lot of times it can be a lot of paperwork and be a rather tedious process. So it can take up to 7 days to really secure a major credit line. Then we also know that sometimes the seller needs to go get also a credit line from their bank and secure that type of financing. That can take another 7 days once they have the order in hand. Then eventually they get around to building and shipping the computers, and the seller receives the invoice from the buyer. And then the seller invoices the buyer. The buyer receives the computer, and then the bank ends up paying the invoice for the seller's bank. That could be net 30 terms, that could be net 60, net 90 even. And then it takes time also for the bank to liquidate the financing. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of inefficiencies in this process. Timeliness really is an issue. So what are we working on? What are we looking at to potentially solve this? Well, we're actually considering several hybrid type of technology solutions. This could mean whether it's blockchain, artificial intelligence, IoT devices, even some areas of edge computing. Bringing these together to actually look at how we can speed up the processing. And as you can see, we've gone from days to minutes. So this is a view of the future, and this concept of just-in-time financing and how it can literally happen in minutes is something you're going to be hearing more and more about. Just because these types of solutions offer that type of efficiency, enhanced security, the full audit trail, and the elevated trust between parties. So the future is very bright. But we also want to take a moment and talk through some of the challenges and complexities. One of the things we're also seeing too on this very utopian type of road is that there's still a lot of areas where there's just so much complexity out in the supply chain and the world itself, such as customs, the areas of transportation, how to get those paper documents digitized. Same with looking at borders and import inspection. Every country, even a lot of territories, have their own types of laws, guidelines, rules. Makes it very, very complex. So this isn't going to happen overnight. It's one of the things when we look at a lot of these types of supply chain types of consortiums, and particularly around blockchain, it's like there was this initial rush, but it is going to take us time. We're on the right road, we're on the journey, but the goal is to potentially bring nearly all of these supply chain and logistics parties together. And it could take, not next month, not next year. It's going to probably take up to the next decade. What I wanted to show on this slide is just one of the lifts, if you will, from our lab. And I think sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words, because we're taking like these hybrid and integrated supply chain financing process, and we're looking to really simplify them. There's a lot of complexity, sometimes needless complexity out there, and turning it into something much more simplified, such as this, which takes all of those steps on the left-hand side and shows you it's down to 12 steps on the right-hand side. The same thing with this slide. It shows you one of the diagrams we're working on. We've listed out all the various parties along the supply chain and the logistics pathways, but we also say, okay, what do we have that's already looking pretty good? We've got this figured out. We can do this, but what's in the middle again? Those insurance companies, the transport companies, the customs. That's where the real work still remains. Those are the gray boxes here. But I think, again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It shows you've done a lot of work, but we still got more to do. The other slide, this one actually tells a little bit about how we're leveraging technology, and that's through the API workflows. So when you're in the trenches like I am on a day-to-day basis in the lab, we're actually writing these types of APIs and we're testing them to show how efficiently we can process information. APIs are one of the pieces of the puzzle to helping to streamline and make the supply chain even that much more efficient. So we also want to stop just for a minute and talk about another area where the world has some current challenges and complexities, but also some really keen opportunities. And as you and everyone here on the planet knows, disruption is becoming more frequent and more severe. You can see from the IMF World Uncertainty Index is highlighted and brought together in this slide and I credit McKinsey's recent report, that they're actually highlighting too, even looking at the geopolitical risk index in the United States, couple that with the cybersecurity issues, add natural disasters that ever on the increase. Like, we are just faced with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of disruption. We are living in times as never before. We also know that we're facing the climate crisis. And basically, we ask a rather rhetorical question as far as who's not aware of the environmental challenges that we face on our planet today. So we look at the supply chain and we look at these areas where financing can come in. What are we going to do? And we know also that people have come together, such as the work the United Nations has done on the 17 Goals for Sustainable Development and the work that the European Union has done in regards to the Net Carbon Directive. We know that about 25% of all global trade is going to be affected at the end of this year to set out those new types of classifications. So we also are proud to say that CGI is aligned to the SDG goals and also the 2030 deadline. So the world is moving. It's moving in many, many different directions, but also a big push is underway. The other thing that we wanted to take a look at too is what's happening in the environmental, society, and corporate governance, called the ESG departments in a lot of these big corps and in these big banks. And we've learned that the next big thing is that there's a $110 trillion green recovery that's underway. This is post-coronavirus, post-COVID. The world is going to be basically coming out of this time and looking at how they can actually invest money into infrastructure improvement, largely by governments and nations are going to be putting money into infrastructure. So this next slide actually just highlights some of the things that you probably heard about from Tom Udelson, the keynote speaker who talked about sustainability along the supply chain. The same thing holds true here. The greening of the supply chain is a huge corporate sustainability strategy. It's a part of something that we're looking at within our lab as well. But we also want to address too, what's one of the pain points, right? What is going on and what is the concern is that corporations and banks know that they have an important role. Banks in particular are going to need to steer investments in the direction of green and sustainable activities. This is going to help control climate risk. It's going to help transition the entire world to a new low carbon economy. But did you also know that the ESG departments often are sitting on a lot of data? They don't want to lose control of it and they don't want to compromise security. So how do we bring these parties together, even sometimes within the bank itself or these corporations internally, and how do they work and partner with other entities? It's something that you could think of as called the network effect. Like the more people that join the network, the more sharing, the more they're able to build upon the knowledge and the data that they've been able to derive and share. So that brings us back again momentarily to our Trade 360 solution. How are we going to leverage this solution and look at addressing climate change risk? So one of the things we want to target is one of our product offerings and a big part of our product offering is related to supply chain financing. And that actually has to do with the value of the underlying receivables and payables that are part of trade in this overall physical goods transferring on a day-to-day, on an annualized basis is about 17 trillion US dollars, according to McKinsey's Global Payments Report from 2020. But we also know too that there's an unmet trade finance needs. And this unmet needs, as mentioned on the first slide that I presented, is about 1.5 trillion. So we're able to bring these small remote farmers who may not have the technology or the sophistication to be filling out all of these big type of loan applications. How do we equip them with these hybrid technologies and bring them together and receive the financing that they really need to bring their products to market? So that's what we're working on. That's what we're looking at. Some of the key takeaways, things to take note of. I used to be a professor, so I'm going to ask you to pick up a pen and remember just-in-time financing. Think about green supply chain financing. Also, green scoring is going to be the next big thing along with ESG. And this new science of networking, there's a lot that's being explored, a lot to understand in regards to that. But remember, the data in a lot of these departments is often siloed. And my final thoughts, yes, change is the new norm. We are going to be dealing with disruption, a lot of uncertainty, and also nothing's changed. Data is honestly still the new oil. So the old with the new and the new with the old, and looking to achieve that network effect is again going to take time. Keep your ear to the ground, listen and hear what's happening before it comes, right? So be listening and taking indications from multiple signals. Do a lot of reading, stay adaptable and flexible, and foster innovation. Build your own innovation lab and reward those workers for their ingenuity and their hard work. Thank you again for inviting me to the conference.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you once again. I believe every bit of the presentation, right from the challenges to the way forward, everything was very beautifully explained. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. With that, let's quickly march ahead towards our next session. We're talking about building a foundation for effective data intelligence and reduce cost. In fact, our next speaker is the Director of Digital Transformation with GEP, and she will be discussing some of the events that happened in recent times that have called for quicker decision to act in a constantly changing global marketplace. We have with us Kokila Roy, Director of Digital Transformation GEP, to share her thoughts with us here at the 8th annual edition of the summit. And we'll get the session started in just a couple of seconds.